We're about to go live in three, two, and one. We're live.
Hi, everyone. We are SAV, Subtle Asian Voices. I'm your host, Katie, here with my co-hosts, Tiffany and Brian. We're just going to have a laid-back conversation talking about the recent Asian American racial attacks and just kind of have a discussion about it.
And we'd love for you all to engage with us too. This is a live stream, so feel free to send in comments. We'll be able to see them live and respond to you real time in the chat box, and we'll begin.
And obviously tell Tiffany's ready with her headset and the glasses. she's all ready. Okay. So I have some stories that I collected, and I wanted to kind of share them with the group here, and maybe we can reflect on them, including some statistics, so we can just kind of chat about them. So I'll read off a couple of things here. I'm sure many of these are actually very familiar, as I've personally seen more media attention towards them. But a couple of them here. The 84-year-old San Francisco man who died in January after being pushed to the ground. I think many of us seen that video. Very disturbing. There was a 61-year-old man who was slashed on the face with a box cutter at New York subway last month. And it was a couple comments that he even made was like, no one was there to help him. No video was taken. Like it was pretty intense. Another one was a 52-year-old woman who was violently shoved to the ground while in line at a bakery in Flushing, Queens last month. And then one other one here is the 91-year-old man in Oakland who was also shoved to the ground. And of course, all of these individuals share in common that they were all Asian American.
Elderly, too.
In what?
Elderly, too.
Yeah, and elderly. So a lot of these stories, and then now let me share some of the statistics that I found. So the New York police reported 28 different hate crimes targeting Asian Americans in 2020. And this is compared with just 3 in the previous year. So that's a pretty big jump. Now, the Stop AAPI hate group has received more than 2,800 firsthand accounts nationwide of attacks of other abuse directed at people of Asian descent between March and December of 2020. And then one other statistics is that another analysis that was released this month by the Center for the Study of Hate and Extremism at the California State University found that hate crimes in 16 of the country's largest cities actually decreased overall by 7% in 2020. But then those that targeted Asian people rose by nearly 150%. And I think that statistic right there is quoted quite often. So that's large, rose by nearly 150% despite the decrease overall. Of course, we all know hate crimes are underreported, right? And the actual numbers are likely a lot higher. So those are kind of some of the stories that I found. And maybe we can go around and share, why do you think this is happening? What are your thoughts on all of this and any personal experiences that you may have had?
I can share first.
Go ahead, Tiffany.
I don't think that any of this is new, right? I think there's just some more attention to it, especially with technology these days. Everyone has a smartphone on them. Not everyone, but a lot of people have smartphones on them. When you think about back in the day, you maybe had flip phones that may have had camera functionality. And so not only are people able to, record it, but it's also more of a topic, I would say, these days with social media, just connecting more people. And so, yeah, I think it's always been there. I don't know in what capacity, right? I think that the piece around those statistics being underreported is definitely something to note. Yeah, for sure.
What do you think, Katie?
Yeah, definitely. I want to echo what Tiffany said. I'm from the Midwest, so kind of sharing a personal story. People around me don't hear about these reports, and I think a lot of them are hearing about it first time because of social media and all the shares and stuff.
I'm kind of curious from both of your perspectives. So it seems I definitely agree that there is likely more that we hear about because of social media. People are capturing things on video. But do you think there is a net increase, or do you think it's always been there and the numbers are still the same? Or do you think there's been like a net increase still, despite that?
I think net increase just because of COVID. I mean, with like the blaming thing and the transition from a Republican leader to Democrat now, I think that transition just caused a spike in um, opinions, and then it carries over to social problems like racial attacks and stuff like that.
I would say coming from a STEM background, I would feel hesitant to say that there's more of these types of attacks without having actual numbers to base that off of, right? I think when we recognize that the numbers are underreported, that just means we have to consider that as a calibrate, basically, right? If you consider that they're always underreported, that should still, the increase should still be accounted for in that underreported number. So I feel hesitant to say that there's more, but I wouldn't be surprised if our past presidency or leadership contributed to some of that being a little more outward, simply because people look to leaders as inspiration, as a role model to see what's okay and what's not okay. And when you have leadership that is so vocal and also enacting policies around people that are different than them, I think that increases and makes people think it's okay. It's like, oh, so and so in our leadership is doing it, so it's okay for us to follow suit and also do it.
Yeah, I mean, similar to you, Tiffany, with the whole data thing, I think it's very hard to quantify anything and say if something increased or decreased without actual hard numbers. And there's no like national standard reporting mechanism to capture hate crimes per se. It's just all these different groups individually, and there's not like what exactly constitutes a hate crime. How do you know that it was actually hate crime? Maybe people were just taking advantage of an elderly person. Like we really don't know, so it is very hard to quantify. um, with that said, if I were to guess, I think my personal opinion would be that both COVID and then the communication from the previous administration probably caused a net increase. Like, I don't know how substantial, but probably a net increase in the amount of attacks that have occurred. um, but we don't know. We honestly don't know. Like, have either of you experienced anything personal related to this, like racism or attacks out in public?
I would say no direct attacks, like physical altercations.
Mm.
Um, I've been lucky to live in a couple different areas of different, diverse demographics. And I think just being around, I think it helps to be around other people that are also different because, everybody's different from everyone. So it feels a little more accepting. But also in those cases, I feel like people feel this way because they don't understand the differences amongst different cultures and different races, so they see that you're different than them, and so they think that's bad, or maybe they associate some stereotypes or judgments they would have heard from other people. And so it was really unfortunate because I feel like us as humans are so valuable because we're different, but a lot of people, or some people, don't understand that our differences are actually a positive thing, not so much a bad thing, and so it ends up dividing us. I will say though, for me, whenever I do feel like I'm being targeted or, had racial slurs said to me, yelled at me, I usually end up closing down. I don't really retaliate back. That's what I've been told, right? Just to avoid problems. Like I recall an instance when I was younger. I was getting off of a bus in Philadelphia. That was probably in middle school. I wasn't I wasn't an adult. I was with my grandmother. And there was a person that saw me and my grandmother get off the bus, and he basically said things like "ching chang chong, go back to your country," like, just very disrespectful things. And I didn't say anything. I just kept walking. But as reflecting on it, I wish I had, said something. But also, when you do say something, um, it also puts you in a place of danger too, right? Like, it's easy, not easier, but sometimes it feels safer just to hear it and walk away versus say something back and potentially cause more anger.
Have you experienced anything, Katie?
Like Tiffany, not like physical harm, but a lot of like verbal or like yeah, verbal or yeah, just mainly just verbal attacks. And just like making fun of our differences, whether it's like visual appearance or a language or food. And this is like examples referring to like ninth grade and below. Um, Also, like the yellow school bus. Yeah, on the school bus. Usually in the back of bus is when all the um, racial verbal attacks happen. And yeah, I had personal experience where sometimes I kept quiet or sometimes I fought back. But yeah, usually the the ones that did the verbal attacks got in trouble from the bus driver, and either like they didn't ride the bus or something after so many attacks, or I just kind of kept my eye out, like I wouldn't feel safe, like, oh, there's this guy again. And he was kind of known for like delinquency and stuff like that. So I guess it all comes down to like their environment to even know to have these verbal attacks to me and my sister at the time. Yeah.
Anything recent from either of you? Or you're reflecting a lot of previous experiences? Like anything recent, let's say 2020.
Yeah, 2020. Yeah, I think 2020 is when we did voting. Yeah, in March 2020. I didn't really receive an attack, but I was voting in my county, and I was at the county building, the city county building, to do my votes. And then we had the COVID precautions was 6 feet apart. There was this couple behind me. It was a married couple, maybe in their 50s. The wife saw me and she got scared and like hid behind the husband just because I was Asian. I was like, wow, I lived here my whole life. I can't believe that just happened. And not sure if this is really racial related, but when I got to the front to get my ballot, they defaulted as I was Republican. And I was like, oh, I would like a different ballot. And I was like, and I thought it was like pre-done, but like I guess when they pulled out my name in the system, or they just default gave me that ballot. But I was like, oh, I would like another one. And then continue on and voted, and then yeah, and then went home. But I was like, interesting change about to happen. And that was like the start of COVID. So I was like, okay. But then we were working from home, so I didn't really have a lot of interaction with people 2020 besides like the internet and what people feed of or stuff like that. Or maybe like some of my connections stopped talking to me, but it could have been just 2020. So I don't really have stats or statistics to see what more violence happened or anything like that.
Yeah, go ahead.
One thing I did notice though, because you hear all these news stories, like, oh, this is like nothing near home. Not nothing, right? But we're hearing stories coming from those cities that have larger, Asian American communities that have Chinatowns and things like that. Here in DC, we have a Chinatown, but I don't really consider it a Chinatown. There's not like a predominant, Asian community there. but I did hear of some reports of attacks on specific Asian-owned businesses out in Columbia, Maryland,
I heard about that.
which is a little bit outside of DC. And that was really prominent because there were other storefronts there, right? In this area, usually stores are kind of grouped together. And so to me, it seemed like a trend that they were targeting specifically those businesses, which is really hurtful and like it's heartbreaking to hear, especially considering from my family's background, we could have potentially been the owners of a storefront like that. And to wake up one morning and just seeing the hate, but then also having to deal with the aftermath after, right? Like you won't be able to open that day and you lose sales and then all the money to repair the situation. So yeah, that was definitely a little heartbreaking to see it so close to home.
Yeah, I saw a lot of posts from friends that were local in the area about that. That seems very targeted, especially when you target only the Asian storefronts and literally not the other ones. Personally, I've experienced it my entire life. Attacks a lot, but I
Like,
think, huh?
or what kind of attacks? Like physical, verbal, that.
Mainly antagonistic verbal ones. Um, I don't know if any of them have been physical altercations due to race, but I think there's always a lot of bullying growing up, and kids are mean, but I think that um, certain parts of your life, maybe it's not. How do you best say it? Like, for example, high school. Okay, in high school, it's hard to distinguish some of these attacks sometimes because in high school, if you try and troll someone or burn someone, the goal is for the other person to dish it right back out. So I don't know if that's how our high school was. It was
Okay.
simply people will rag on you hard, but you're expected to rag on them back. And if you can't, then you're just gonna get picked on more. So it was like a very
Mm,
rough environment where everyone was just straight up ragging on each other all day.
sounds
And
savage.
yeah, and of course there's a lot of racial connotations and slurs that are thrown around in that kind of environment. But definitely a lot of bullying. I've experienced it, outside of high school too. Even like my parents owned a restaurant, and growing up working there, elementary, middle, high, people would call in and be like, "You guys got dogs? Are you serving cats?" And then there's say, the typical racial slurs. So I've experienced it most of my life, and even in 2020, I've like Tiffany, I avoid certain confrontations sometimes because you never know when someone wants to harm you in some way. So in 2020, I think there's been 3 instances where people got up in my face and I just walked away. Because what's the point, right? People are being antagonistic to you, try to block your path, and for no other reason. And they're verbally shouting slurs, so it's racially motivated. And what are you gonna do? Are you gonna punch the guy in the face? that's that's not the right thing to do. So you just keep walking away. Um, but that's it. So what I think is a difference though, when you compare the previous um, incidences with the most recent, and I think I hear this more from my family and friends who are in big cities like New York or San Fran or Los Angeles, is that I don't usually have any fears because I've experienced a lot of this in my life, so it's just like, oh, it's whatever. People are just being dumb. But my family and friends who are in some of these other big cities are like, it's scary. Like they're very scared in some of these cities, and I think that's something to be said in 2020. They're afraid of walking alone sometimes. They're afraid of being attacked purely for being Asian in certain places, especially in New York. which I'm still like, walking around and stuff. I didn't get any hate, but they're just worried, that someone might just randomly come up to them and just hit them or assault them for being Asian. I think that's been really real for me. That's something I have not experienced personally, but I've seen a lot of my family and friends talk about it. Just like, yeah, I'm really scared.
Honestly, these reports make me scared for my grandparents. I mean, given quarantine, or I don't even know if it's called quarantine more, given COVID restrictions, my grandparents have just really stayed at home. Like they haven't really gone anywhere. But normally, like they like to, get out, kind of go to the grocery store or wherever. My grandfather, I'm pretty impressed with him because he doesn't speak any English, but he somehow figured out like the metro and the bus systems to get him like around. And so, he used to do a lot of that, which he doesn't do anymore. So I'm in a way glad they're at home because then I'm not so much worried about them being out and about. But like, I just think of, these families that may have grandparents in these Chinatowns of these big cities because that's where they feel comfortable and safe. Then there being attacks being reported coming from those supposed safe communities, like it makes me really worried about that generation too.
Yeah, definitely the elderly. I'm fortunate. My grandparents are home. They don't ever leave. Um,
Mm.
but I can't imagine. I guess the I would be most worried, just like you, about any attacks on elderly. I can't imagine, someone assaulting any one of my elderly family members. Like I can't even fathom that. All the emotions that you would feel from that. Like I don't think I personally, if I experienced something like that, I'd probably be less inclined to like it's whatever. I just brush it off. Words not gonna hurt you. But if you did that to a family member, I don't know what kind of raw emotions would come out in that sense, and that hurts, man. Like why would like I think I heard a couple people talk about it before. You know, most Asians probably are less inclined to speak out about stuff, but we respect our elders a lot.
Mhm.
And
Mm-hmm.
you don't do that to the elderly. And yeah, I don't know. It's very hard for me to fathom that someone has that much disrespect to harm someone for an elderly. It doesn't even have to be Asian Americans. Just the fact that someone's
Mhm.
elderly. Why? What goes through someone's mind to be that sick to hit someone that's elderly? Uh,
That can't do anything
I can't.
back, It's
Right.
like
I
honestly when you were
Yeah,
saying that,
they're
Brian,
brittle.
yeah,
uh,
that hurts.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm glad my grandparents are home, and I mean, they used to like always go out to the more Chinese areas of Ohio, yeah, for dim sum and meeting out with friends, going to those Chinese grocery shopping. But now they have my dad or my aunts to go grocery shopping for them because
Mm.
they're younger, they're faster, they can go in and out and do it in small batches. Like our family used to like fill up a whole family van of groceries whenever my grandparents go on their grocery shopping dates. But things are a little bit different now. I'm just glad they're home so they don't have to increase that chance to like have interaction with others or being in the slightly bigger areas of Ohio. Mm.
Yeah, I'm curious. Like, I wonder if it would be different if we had like if we had family members that lived in a place where there's like a larger community where the elderly do go out and go shopping. Like, San Fran, everyone just walks out to the street, or New York, they go to Chinatown, they buy their
mhm.
groceries, they frequent their dim sum. And in those cases, the elderly do go out. But I think in some of the places that we are right now, it's less likely, or even like yeah, just less likely than some of those other big cities. I wonder if we have people that had those family members, they are experiencing a lot more. Seems like we're our experience, personal experiences aren't too bad,
Mhm.
which is good. Okay, well, let's shift towards a very difficult part, which I was thinking about this a little bit before we jumped on the live stream, which is like next steps and stuff. But I don't know if either of you had a chance to listen to Joe Biden's primetime address, I think, just like 2 days ago. It was kind of reassuring. He actually specifically spent like a minute and denounced the rise in hate crimes against Asian Americans. And I thought that was, nice. I think, the first step to solving any problem is purely awareness that something exists, right? So I thought that was really nice. But what do either of you think in terms of, be it an increase in hate crimes or hate crimes in Asia for against Asian Americans in general? What can we even do to reduce them or prevent them or anything? Like, what are your thoughts? This is a very hard question too, so I don't think anyone had any
Yeah.
real good tangible things to say, but I'm curious, what do you guys think?
Yeah, Brian, like you said, awareness is like the first step of acknowledging something and then doing something about it. So what I've personally done within my community and my peers is just sharing that these stories are happening. And some of my friends that are not exposed to that stuff, they'll reply like, if this ever happens to you, like they're gonna get a big whoop or whatnot, or stuff like that. And for friends like that to actually take that step and comment on stories like that is happening when I would share them in my Instagram stories or Facebook. I'm just glad doing my part in sharing that and creating that awareness for others that might not have that awareness because either they're a non-person of color or white, but other than that, I'm not sure what next steps to do besides educating and sharing resources like where you can donate to help these AAPI groups and stuff like that to assist the ones that have been affected or hurt. So those two call of actions that I guess that what I've been doing or know of. What about you, Tiffany? Anything?
Yeah, I definitely agree with both of you, right? First, acknowledging the problem and then continuing to share stories that support what the problem statement is. I know I'm kind of approaching it from a very scholarly aspect, but this is so interesting because it's not going to be resolved in like a day, an administration, a year, right? It's going to take really a culture shift. And I think us as Asian Americans, we can recognize and say, oh, this is wrong, but not everyone in the US specifically feels like it's wrong to do that. And eventually, I think the culture shift needs to be such that more of the majority finds that wrong so that the people who are doing those things feel like they're out of place. Right now, we're at a place where those people who are doing those attacks feel like it's okay to. And so, that's not just action in the Asian American community, but requires action from other communities as well. And so, yeah, I think just keep talking about it. People can say it's wrong, but if they see it, will they stand up? I think that's really the true case there. You see all of those companies that are, denouncing these types of actions, but what are they actually doing about it other than saying it's wrong? So no clear answer really there. I think this conversation is a start. I'm also wondering if this should be a conversation even with our families. I know within my family, we don't really talk about these things, especially if they're not pleasant. And so I don't know how beneficial it would be to have an open conversation with my parents and my grandparents about what's happening here in the US. But that's another avenue, right, where we can acknowledge that this is a problem.
Yeah, I feel like I have a slight edge because I looked at a couple posts of what other people suggest to do and things like that. But even then, it's so hard. And I think what is a more interesting conversation is someone recently talked about, in terms of interventions, one of the groups is, and I'm going to pull straight from this article, I'm going to read this like paragraph. And I quote, the main issue for us right now is, do we go ahead as a single Asian American movement to address anti-Asian racism? Or is anti-Asian racism both part of a bigger wave of racism and the solution is beyond just what Asian Americans care about or should do? I think that's a very interesting thought. And then someone else, and this is an actual tangible thing someone did, a coalition of more than 90 Bay Area organizations took a different approach, calling for community-based solutions and warning against interventions that would contradict reforms championed by Black Lives Matter activists. I don't know exactly what that means because I'm not sure what contradictions are there, but I do think like when I think of even Black Lives Matter movement, I don't think of it as specific to Black Lives Matter. It's a attack on humans. It's the big picture is racism. Like it's a big issue, and that's why we all need to be a part of it. So that's why I'm a little torn in that sense. Like, are we specifically saying anti-Asian American racism, or are we saying racism in general? And when we divide these kind of groups and we have different resources, it's harder to tackle a big problem like racism. Like, we all need to be in this together. Granted, there's probably a place for being specific in many regards, but I don't know. I don't know what can be done, but I do think what we're doing right now is good. Like I think like we had something else planned for this week. Yeah, exactly right. We had something else planned for this week, and especially Wendy. Wendy was very vocal about this, and I think so too. I saw a lot of different other social media people do it as well. We all feel somewhat like we should say something because we have a platform. We should talk about it to bring awareness to our viewers. So I think we're doing something there. I think what would be nice for me is if I saw like an elderly Asian, or actually elderly anyone, walking the streets or groceries, I'll just walk alongside with them and chit chat and make sure they're safe and nothing like that kind of happens. Maybe that's something else that we can do too.
I like that.
Mhm.
Could I actually respond to the comment that you shared around, do we take this individually as, this is the Asian movement, this is the Black movement, or do we do everything together? I think it might be interesting to take a blended approach, because when you don't have those separate, I would say, focus areas or interests, then you kind of dilute the problem. And I think the problem between like racism against Asians looks very different than racism against, the Black community. And I think it's important to have that distinction because we don't face the same prejudices that the Black community does. And so to have, specific actions and movements for each community makes sense to me. But I think also coming together, there is value in that too, right? Because we don't necessarily want to separate our communities as we're speaking up for our own communities. We want to come together. And so I don't know what that looks like. That's going to take a lot of coordination, right? But yeah, I definitely think that would be really awesome to see.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point to make, even with like the prejudices experienced by both ethnic groups are very different, very, very different. And how people fix or try to help those situations probably look also very different. And I think the perspective everyone probably has different perspectives on this. I was thinking about it also from the perspective of non-profit organizations, not non-government organizations, non-profit organizations. I don't remember, but basically, an organization that is created to help some specific issue, right? And I'm always like, yeah, that's what I want to do. We want to be part of this organization or create an organization to do this. Or like maybe we're talking about right now, maybe like we're so inspired right now, we're going to create our own nonprofit organization and help Asian Americans and reduce attacks on them, right? That's like an idea we have. We're all um, motivated to do this, but, and I actually got this from my sister, who does a lot of work in this area. She told me something that always resonates with me, where creating another organization to do something that probably many other people are already doing is actually not always beneficial. If anything, it harms. You're splitting resources. So like that's where I think the idea, and probably just ignorance because I don't know enough about the topic, is like racism is a problem. You know, we can have like so many little groups underneath, and we just keep further splitting and splitting and splitting, and then those resources become very inefficient. Like there has to be some level where we can, and maybe it's, you know, grouped under hate crimes in general. You know, maybe all hate crimes and how we target each one is different. But we need one big group, community, pool of resources versus like continuously splitting out more and more. But again, there's obviously a good reason to split. I just don't know where that branching off is. Just rambling there.
Yeah, good verbal visual there. Yeah, that was good.
So we're gonna start a nonprofit. Is that what's happening?
Yeah.
When you were saying that, Brian, I could foresee, like, since I presume the pool of organizations that are focusing on these, you know, Asian interests, on the interests of the Black community, there's probably plenty of them. I don't know all of them. Also, I'm not very well versed in that space. But I wonder if there is a group whose focus is linking all of these, you know, groups together, whether that's on a regional level, whether that's on a special interest level. You know, maybe there are some groups focused on like education, maybe some groups focus specifically on, you know, criminal activity that that these groups are involved in. And so if there were groups that help to bring these groups together, that could be a route we could take. Not saying we, but I'm saying like in general.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we tried to do something like that in the very beginning, where at the heart of the Black Lives Matter movement, we did try and engage with those groups and how we can be, you know, Black and Asian solidarity movements. So many groups out there. I don't know, but you know what? What's nice is in reading some of these articles, and what was it made me think about the light at the end of the tunnel. I think a lot of times I don't feel very good that Asians typically don't speak up, but I did see a lot of articles talk about how that's actually a little outdated. You know, a lot of the older generation didn't speak up, and partly, you know, hate crimes weren't reported because, you know, there's a language barrier. You know, they just came over. It's hard to understand. They're just kind of brush it off. But we are a very different generation. You know, I don't think our parents would ever imagine going on a live stream to talk about things like that.
Right.
You know, or even like, even if they experienced it, which my parents have, they came over and they talk about all the experiences they have. They don't do anything. They didn't do anything. They didn't go and report it. They're like, whatever, you know, they don't care about it. But we're talking about it. And I think that's really reassuring to hear. Like the younger generation do speak up. You know, we are not going to tolerate the same things. We're going to speak up. We're going to create videos about it. And I think that's kind of reassuring. So sometimes it does make me want to speak up a little more. And I feel like there's more that can be done. I don't know what that is.
Well, I appreciate you doing some research and sharing what the experts have said.
Yeah, it would be. It's very interesting. I mean, it's a little overwhelming, to be honest. You know, going through and whenever we do research on things, I'm just like, there's so many problems in the world. Why can't people just learn to be nice? It's very easy to be respectful and kind and not say mean things and stuff like that. But
Free. It's free.
yeah, it's free. You'll probably be rewarded with something that's nice back to you. I don't know. Which, fun fact. Oh, go ahead, Tiffany.
I was gonna say, not to get too philosophical here, but I feel like the people who don't know how to be nice probably weren't nice to begin with, and so
Yeah.
they are a product of their environment. They're a product of what they've experienced. Hurt people. So when I see that, I feel
Prevalent.
pain for those people, because I'm just like, dang, what did you go through that made you like this kind of person? Like, I'm hurting inside.
Mm. So then it's up to like the restored people to help restore people. But we gotta come together for that. The cycle repeats.
Yeah, I feel like I'm more optimistic in some ways, where it's like you have to break the chain at some point, right? Like if someone treats you negatively in some way, you don't have to react in a negative way. You can. I feel as though sometimes that does change people too, where it's like, whoa, I just did something negative to you. Why are you being nice to me? And maybe it makes them reconsider. I think there's some research in that areas too, to support when you do kind things, and maybe someone's in a bad mood but you change their mood, you pay it forward. There are some research that shows that positive things lead to more positive things, at least in my mind. But
Yeah. Way to spread the love.
yeah, spread the love. Spread the love, like the video, comment, spread the likes, and all that. But we are wrapping up on the hour here. So, any last words or comments from you guys?
I think this is good. Let's call it an end. But I hope our perspective, personal stories, and all really help you guys engage and give awareness and help you out and inspire ideas of what you guys can do next.
Thank you for your time here today, everyone. Really appreciate you sharing a couple moments with us, hearing our sides, and looking forward to a brighter future.
It's a beautiful day outside, so I'll go out and explore. All right, so we're gonna end the stream. Thanks everyone for tuning in.
Yep. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.